The Gulf of Oman is not a forgiving place to hide. At its widest point, it stretches just over 300 nautical miles from the Iranian coastline to the shores of the Arabian Peninsula. A shallow, thermally complex body of water where sound travels strangely, where layered temperature gradients create acoustic mirages that fool sonar arrays into hearing ships that are not there and missing ones that are. For submarine operations, it is simultaneously one of the most tactically attractive and one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. The water is warm enough to mask thermal signatures. The shipping traffic is dense enough to provide acoustic cover. But the geometry is tight. There is nowhere to run that the surface is not already watching. The U.S. Navy knew this. The Iranian Navy knew this. And on the night of a Thursday that began with no indication it would become anything other than routine, both sides were operating on entirely different assessments of who, exactly, was watching whom. It started not with an explosion, not with an alarm. It started with a discrepancy in a logbook. A logistics officer aboard a Fateh-class destroyer operating in the Gulf of Oman, designated as the lead escort for a transit corridor being used by a commercial tanker convoy, was conducting a routine cross-check of the ship's acoustic environment log at 9:42 p.m. The log was an automated record of sonar contact classifications compiled over the preceding 72 hours. The logistics officer was not a sonar specialist. His job that evening was administrative, verifying that the automated log entries matched the signed contact cards in the physical binder. They did not. One entry, time-stamped at 4:17 a.m. 2 days earlier, appeared in the automated log as a routine biologics classification, whale or large fish, but had no corresponding signed contact card in the physical binder. The gap was narrow, barely noticeable, a single missing card among 47 properly filed ones. He flagged it to the watch officer. The watch officer flagged it to the sonar supervisor. The sonar supervisor pulled the raw acoustic data from the archive. What she found was not a biologics contact. The acoustic return at 4:17 a.m. 2 days prior had the frequency profile of a mechanically propelled underwater vehicle, traveling at low speed on a bearing that placed it approximately 4 nautical miles northwest of the destroyer's position at the time. The contact had lasted 11 minutes before fading below the detection threshold. The automated classification algorithm had rated it as biologics with a confidence level of 73%, because the contact's noise signature had been partially masked by a layer of warm surface water that compressed its acoustic profile into a frequency band commonly associated with large marine mammals. The algorithm had made a reasonable assessment with incomplete data. The sonar supervisor did not find the contact reassuring. She found it familiar. The specific compression artifact in the acoustic signature, the way the noise floor dropped at a particular frequency before recovering, was a pattern she had studied in a classified technical intelligence document published 9 months earlier by the Naval Undersea Warfare Center. The document described it as a known acoustic characteristic of a Fateh-class diesel-electric submarine operating at near-silent slow cruise speed with its noise-dampening systems engaged. Iranian-built. Iranian-operated. And apparently, it had been 4 nautical miles from this destroyer 2 days ago, and nobody had noticed until now. She filed an urgent report at 11:58 p.m. By 2:30 a.m. the following morning, the report had reached both the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain and the Office of Naval Intelligence. By 4:15 a.m., the ONI analysts had done something the ship's crew had not yet had time to do. They had pulled every acoustic archive from every U.S. and Allied asset operating in the Gulf of Oman for the preceding 30 days and run the same frequency compression analysis across all of it. They found 6 additional contacts that matched the signature profile. 6 across a 30-day window. 6 separate instances in which a submarine consistent with a Fateh-class platform had been operating in the operational vicinity of U.S. naval assets without being formally detected or classified as a threat. The contacts had been filed variously as biologics, as merchant vessel noise artifacts, and in one case, as a sonar system self-noise event during a calibration cycle. Each individual classification had been reasonable given the data available at the time. Taken together, they described a sustained intelligence collection and positioning operation of a sophistication that contradicted every current assessment of Iranian submarine doctrine. Someone had been patient. Someone had been doing this for a month. What the ONI analysts did not know, not yet, was why. The surveillance pattern was not consistent with simple intelligence collection. The 6 contacts were not random. They clustered. 3 of them fell within a 6 nautical mile radius of the same transit corridor. A deep water channel that U.S. destroyers used regularly when escorting high-value commercial tankers between the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Aden. And the spacing of the contacts, when plotted on a timeline, described a progression. Each successive contact positioned slightly deeper into the corridor geometry, each one a few nautical miles closer to the optimal firing position for a subsurface torpedo engagement. Someone was not collecting intelligence. Someone was rehearsing. At 5 a.m., the 5th Fleet Commander authorized the activation of a classified contingency protocol designated Iron Veil. Under Iron Veil, the apparent patrol posture of the destroyer remained unchanged. The ship continued its assigned escort duties. Its radar and sonar emission profile remained at standard operational levels. From the outside, the ship looked exactly as it always looked, a single Burke-class destroyer running a scheduled escort transit, apparently unaware that it had been under surveillance for a month. Beneath that appearance, the geometry of the entire operational theater quietly rearranged itself. A Los Angeles-class nuclear attack submarine that had been operating in the northern Arabian Sea was redirected to a patrol position at the entrance to the deep water corridor. It went completely silent, all non-essential systems shut down, running on battery propulsion at a speed that produced virtually no acoustic signature. A second asset, a P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, began flying a modified patrol pattern that appeared from any external observation to be a routine anti-surface surveillance mission, but whose actual acoustic sensor coverage was precisely targeted on the deep water corridor transit zone. An MH-60R helicopter from the destroyer itself was repositioned under the cover of a standard anti-surface patrol flight, preloaded with lightweight torpedoes and active sonobuoy dispensers, and assigned a loiter pattern that placed it within 90 seconds of any point in the corridor. The transit was scheduled for the following night. A convoy of 3 commercial tankers carrying refined petroleum products would move through the deep water corridor beginning at 11 p.m., with the destroyer as primary escort. Every element of the transit profile, timing, route, speed, formation geometry, was identical to the previous 3 transits that the acoustic surveillance pattern suggested the Iranian submarine had been studying. The bait was set. What the U.S. intelligence picture did not yet fully understand was the second layer of the Iranian operation. At 9:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the convoy was scheduled to get underway, a signals intelligence collection platform detected a burst transmission on an encrypted frequency used by Iranian Naval Special Operations units. The transmission was brief, less than 4 seconds, and its content was not immediately decrypted, but its timing and its point of origin, triangulated to a position approximately 40 nautical miles northwest of the corridor entrance, was enough. The transmission was flagged immediately and pushed to the 5th Fleet Operations Center. The operations team had 30 minutes to decide what it meant. What it meant, as the decryption team determined at 10:04 p.m., working at a pace that left 3 separate analysts visibly shaking from the combination of stimulant beverages and sustained focus, was this. The burst transmission was not a communication to the submarine. It was a communication from a secondary asset to a coordination relay. A surface asset, a small vessel operating under commercial registration, flying the flag of a neutral third-party nation, had been designated as a passive acoustic relay station positioned to feed real-time contact data on the U.S. destroyer's position back to the Iranian command network. The commercial vessel had been operating in the transit area for 11 days under the cover of a fishing charter. It carried navigation equipment far in excess of what any fishing vessel would require. And at 9:30 p.m., it had transmitted a position update. The false flag architecture was confirmed. The submarine was not operating alone. It was operating as part of a coordinated intelligence support network. A network that had been specifically constructed to make the attack look like the work of a non-state actor operating independently without traceable Iranian state direction. The commercial vessel was the cutout. The submarine was the weapon. The design was intended to preserve Iranian deniability. The Fifth Fleet commander looked at the decryption summary for 11 seconds. Then she authorized the full execution of Iron Veil. At 11 p.m., the convoy departed. The destroyer took up its standard escort position. All emission control postures remained unchanged. The ship's surface radar painted the commercial vessel, now confirmed as the relay asset, but made no move toward it. The P-8A Poseidon was already dropping a pattern of passive sonobuoys along the corridor's flanks, building an acoustic picture in real time. The Los Angeles-class submarine was motionless at the corridor entrance, its sonar operators listening with the absolute concentration of people who understand that what they are about to hear will determine what happens next. At 11:34 p.m., the submarine sonar team picked up the first acoustic indication of the Fateh-class contact. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, on a bearing that placed it on an intercept trajectory with the convoy's projected position in approximately 40 minutes. The contact was running at near silent speed, at a depth that placed it just below the thermal layer. The same masking strategy that had made it invisible to the destroyer's sonar array a month earlier. It was executing its rehearsed approach with precision. What it could not detect was that the Los Angeles-class submarine was already behind it. The MH-60R helicopter, holding at altitude 18 nautical miles from the convoy's position, received the contact classification from the P-8A's sonobuoy network at 11:41 p.m. The crew switched its acoustic sensors to active mode, a decision that the Iranian submarine would interpret as the destroyer's standard anti-submarine sweep, not as a precision targeting solution. Active pings from a helicopter-deployed sonobuoy array sound nearly identical, at distance, to the routine sonar emissions of a surface escort. The Fateh-class submarine continued its approach. At 11:52 p.m., the Iranian submarine reached its optimal firing position. The torpedo launch came at 11:53 p.m. and 14 seconds. 2 heavyweight torpedoes, fired in a spread pattern designed to bracket the destroyer's projected position and account for evasive maneuvering. Their active guidance systems activated immediately. The sound of their propulsion systems, instantly detectable at close range, was the first confirmation the destroyer's sonar team had of an active engagement. The sonar supervisor on the destroyer called out the contact bearing in a voice that was completely level and completely precise. The Combat Information Center went to active engagement posture in 2.1 seconds. The destroyer executed its torpedo countermeasures immediately. Acoustic decoys launched from the ship's countermeasure dispensers, devices that generate a false propulsion signature calibrated to attract active homing torpedoes. Deployed in a spread pattern off the ship's stern, the ship went to maximum speed, turning hard to present its bow to the incoming threat and reduce its acoustic cross-section. The maneuver was violent enough that loose equipment in the Combat Information Center shifted on its mounts, and one operator grabbed the edge of his console to stay in his seat. The first torpedo tracked the acoustic decoy. It detonated in the destroyer's wake, approximately 400 meters astern. The pressure wave from the detonation reached the hull as a sharp, physical impact, Not structural damage, but enough to feel like a collision, enough to knock two sailors off their feet in the engineering spaces below. Every alarm on the ship activated simultaneously. The noise in the CIC was controlled but total. Overlapping tones, status reports, engagement calls, all of it happening in the same 2 seconds. The second torpedo did not track the decoy. Its guidance system had been updated with a counter-countermeasure algorithm that recognized the decoy's acoustic profile and rejected it, reacquiring the destroyer's actual propulsion signature. It was closing at a rate that gave the ship approximately 70 seconds before impact. The torpedo defense officer on the destroyer made the call in 4 seconds. The ship's own lightweight torpedo, a last resort hard-kill countermeasure, was launched at 11:53 p.m. and 51 seconds, targeted directly at the incoming weapon. Hard-kill torpedo-on-torpedo intercept is not a guaranteed outcome. It requires that a relatively small, fast-moving weapon intercept another relatively small, fast-moving weapon in three-dimensional space, in the dark, in a contested acoustic environment. The engagement solution requires the defending torpedo's guidance system to acquire and maintain track on a target that is actively maneuvering and designed to be difficult to detect. It works. It has been tested. But the margin is not comfortable. The intercept occurred at 11:54 p.m. and 22 seconds, approximately 230 meters from the destroyer's hull. The detonation sent a compression wave through the water that registered on every acoustic sensor in the area simultaneously. Inside the destroyer, the impact felt like the ship had been struck by something enormous. A pressure event that traveled through the hull plating, through the deck, through the bodies of every person standing on it. A seawater fitting in the forward engineering space cracked under the pressure differential and began flooding at a rate that the damage control team had isolated within 90 seconds. 3 sailors sustained minor injuries from falls and equipment impacts during the violent maneuvering sequence. The ship's bow sonar dome suffered a minor pressure deformation that degraded its forward detection range by approximately 30% for the remainder of the engagement. It was not a clean intercept. It was a successful one. Those are different things. The Los Angeles-class submarine did not wait. At 11:54 p.m. and 30 seconds, as the second torpedo was still closing on the destroyer, it had already completed its firing solution on the Fateh-class submarine. The Iranian platform had executed a sprint and drift acceleration immediately after launching, attempting to open the range and change its acoustic profile before any response could arrive. The attempt gained it approximately 800 meters before the Los Angeles-class submarine released its own torpedo at 11:54 p.m. and 45 seconds. The Fateh-class submarine had no warning. Its own acoustic sensors were masked by the noise of its sprint maneuver. The engagement was completed at 11:55 p.m. and 38 seconds. The Iranian submarine was rendered inoperable at a depth that precluded any possibility of recovery. The crew of 3 had approximately 6 seconds between the moment their sonar registered the incoming weapon and the moment of structural compromise. Whether any of them understood in those 6 seconds that the trap they had spent a month preparing had been known, studied, and reversed, that question belongs to the ocean now. At 12:08 a.m., the P-8A Poseidon located and marked the commercial vessel that had been operating as the Iranian coordination relay. A surface interdiction was coordinated with Allied naval assets in the area. The vessel was boarded at 1:47 a.m. The communication equipment aboard, far beyond any commercial navigation requirement, was seized and catalogued. The vessel's operators were taken into custody as captured personnel under international maritime law. The intelligence recovered from the equipment would take analysts 6 weeks to fully process. At 2:15 a.m., the convoy completed its transit of the deep water corridor and cleared into the Gulf of Aden. The tankers had not altered course. Their crews had not been informed that anything unusual had occurred. The Persian Gulf oil markets opened 4 hours later without disruption. Now the accounting. 2 torpedoes launched by the adversary. 1 decoyed. one intercepted at 230 meters by hard kill countermeasure, one Iranian submarine rendered inoperable, one coordination relay vessel seized, 3 destroyer crew members treated for minor injuries, one sonar dome partially compromised, 0 ships lost, 0 commercial vessels contacted, 1 false flag network dismantled, 1 month of Iranian patience that ultimately cost them everything. The engineering of the Iranian operation was not crude. The patience it required, the 30 days of silent, meticulous acoustic rehearsal, the construction of a deniable coordination architecture, the selection of a transit corridor studied long enough to know its geometry precisely, represented a level of operational sophistication that demanded respect even in the context of its failure. The failure was not a failure of Iranian capability. It was a failure of Iranian certainty. They were certain the logbook discrepancy would never be found. They were certain the acoustic signatures had been sufficiently masked. They were certain a missing contact card in a physical binder would never matter. Certainty in the geometry of naval warfare is the most expensive luxury an adversary can afford. The U.S. Navy does not offer refunds. The ocean between Hormuz and Aden does not care who wins. It was there before the first warship crossed it, and it will be there long after the last one does. But the log entry at 4:17 a.m., the one that should have been signed and was not, will remain in the classified record of this operation as the single point where an 11-second gap in paperwork changed the outcome of an engagement that had been planned for a month. That is not a story about technology. That is not a story about submarines or torpedoes or countermeasure algorithms. That is a story about the sailor who noticed, at 9:42 p.m., that one card was missing from a binder. Precision does not announce itself. It waits to be found.